to my mother, who was present. I was born in Granville, New York. Anyway, it was a Sunday during a snowstorm on the 24th of January, 1937. Okay. And when I know that I was very young at the time that I was born, but other than that, I don't know much about it, except that I hate snow. So that probably was ingrown at the moment. So when I came here to Rupert, we didn't have a car. My family didn't own an automobile. So my mother was brought, and I were brought here to Rupert by a man who lived down where the firehouse is now, Russell Hatch. And he brought me home to the little house, which is between here and Lewis Road, going north on Route 153. It's a little house that's now green, and it was owned by Orla Tift. And my parents paid $15 a month for rent there. Anyway, we moved frequently because my father didn't have a steady job. He worked for other farmers, and then he worked at the West Rupert Mill at one time. By 1941, we lived where the Siglowskis do now, on the southern side of the village of Rupert. And we were 1 mile from West Rupert and 1 mile from Rupert. I know that because I walked to school every day when I finally started school. We lived there till 1947. Anyway, the house was sold, so we had to move. But luckily, not for us, not for my great-grandmother. She died at the time in March. And so we were able to buy the farm where I've lived ever since that time. And so in 1947. Yeah, and that's on Lewis Road. And her name was, wait a minute, don't ever get old, Hattie Rogers, Harriet Rogers. She was a Smith, which was a prominent Rupert family for many years. We moved there in July of 1947. Yeah, I was 10 years old.
Cows? You have a barn?
Yes, we did. We had a small dairy. I think we had, at the most, we had 27 cows and a few sheep, pigs, a donkey, and 4 horses. Okay.
The horses were working
Yes.
animals?
2 teams. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We got a tractor, I think, finally in the 1950s, but we still kept a team of horses. So
Chores and
yes.
So part of
Yes.
growing up then was
milking the cows and
okay.
morning and night. And we went to school down, well, while we lived at school, where Sigalski live now, we walked to school. So I was in the, I think the 3rd or 4th grade when we moved. I remember Pearl Harbor Day because we went for a hike up on the hill in front of the Sigalski house. And when we came back, the news was on the radio that the Japanese had attacked us at Pearl Harbor. My mother and father were disciples of Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt could do no wrong, which was wonderful. So I grew up that way myself, and have been a Democrat ever since.
When you moved then to Lewis Road,
Mm-hmm.
how did you get to school? Did you walk then from there?
No, we had a bus. It wasn't a bus; it was just a car. My grandparents lived on the corner there. They had previously rented the house up on, it was called the Leonaire's house. It's where Quarry Road begins now. And
right on the sharp corner there, the old
the big house there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. My father was born there, and his brother was born there, Herman, who's the father of Margaret Bain. And that house was rented from Smith Sheldon. who moved to West Rupert and built a house where Georgia Beebe eventually lived, right on the corner of the Mill Road. Yeah. So there were Sheldons all over the place. And Smith Sheldon owned a slate quarry on Quarry Road. And his brother, who lived in Hebron, owned another slate quarry. And they sued one another for ownership of both quarries. My grandparents bought the house where Helen Mikish lives now at the beginning of Lewis Road, which was called East Road in those days. And Don Lewis eventually owned that same house. That had been bought from a Sheldon family, which that whole road was lined with Sheldons. That was a house where my great-great-great-grandmother had also been born in 1798. She was not only born there, she was married in that same house in 1819. Yeah. So it had a family history before my grandparents bought it eventually. Yeah. Some of the one of the early families that came to Rupert were the Harmons. One brother became proprietor of the Harmon Mint, who coined the coin for Vermont. Well, he had a brother, I can't remember what the brother's name was, but it was the brother's daughter who became my great-great-grandmother, Nancy Harmon Smith. Yeah, and she was, as I said, born in that house in 1798, and then she was married in the same house in 1819. And then she and her husband, eventually moved up the road to what is now the Flower Farm. And that farm, where Holly's Way is, was also owned by a distant relative, an early settler. Anyway, he had several sons who fought in the Revolution. Yes, and he abandoned the farm. Well, he left and went somewhere safer when Burgoyne's troops were coming down from Canada. But when they came back, they had buried their stuff in the old barn there, and when they came back, it hadn't been touched. It looked like they had dug around there looking for stuff, but they didn't find what the family had. So he owned 60 acres. Of course, most of the early plots of land consisted of 60 acres, plus more or less in some cases. The Smith Sheldon place, where my father and Uncle Herm were born, when the railroad came through in 1852, he made a bargain. The railroad needed to pass through that land, so he made a bargain with them that he would give them the right to build the bridge, which used to be called the Overhead Bridge. It was on the way to Perkins Road.
Where the rail trail is.
Yes, where the rail trail. Yeah, and he said he would give them that land or the right to build that bridge if the train would stop each morning and pick up his granddaughters to take them to school in Granville. So they did. So for years, one of those ladies is still alive. She's 103, and she lives down in just over the border in New York State. Yeah. She comes up here usually once each summer.
And do you actually see her?
Oh, yeah, she comes here. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Her sister written a book about the history of the Sheldon family in Rupert. We have it in our archives, but the Higgins family had actually moved to Rupert from Wardsboro, Vermont. I have a letter from my great-grandmother to her mother back in Wardsboro. She said, you ask if anything exciting has happened. Nothing exciting has happened. I had a 6-pound boy a week ago or something like that, she said. And that was my last great uncle, my grandfather's last brother. And there were 5 or 6 in that family, I think. But she said, and this was at the bottom of McKeegan Road. They lived in a little house there. They're two. You can still see parts of fireplaces and so forth. They lived right at the bottom of the road. She said a nice Northern Irish family has just moved in, and those were the McKeegans. They're very nice people, and so forth. But they owned a farm at that point. The McKeegans came. There were 3 or 4 brothers that moved over here from Northern Ireland in the 1870s, I think it was. Yeah, Austin's father came from Northern Ireland. Yeah, yeah. And Eli McKeegan, he was born up on McKeegan Road there. Frank, they called him Bum McKeegan because he was a heavy drinker. And there was a Bum Ayers too, who was where my family lived further up the road. But I don't think he was a heavy drinker. He just had that nickname. So he used to write to me from World War II. He was a soldier. And when I was 6 years old, we lived down where Suglovsky lived, and I broke my leg. I was sliding downhill, and I got a little bit going too fast, so I stuck my leg out to stop myself, and I hit a fence post, broke my leg. And so I got letters from soldiers from Rupert who were in the service, and they used to write to tell me that they wanted me to be well and all this sort of stuff, So I think I still have those letters. I hope I do. Anyway, one of the Dunbar boys and one of the McKeegans. My father and mother had 2 boys, and his brother had 2 girls. And his brother's the one who married the Welsh girl from West Paulet, whose parents came from Wales and worked in the quarries. So they became my grandparents too, because the 4 cousins grew up together. So we were Welsh and we were Irish and we were a little bit of everything. It was fun.
Probably.
Yeah,
right?
and the Moores, Horace Moore.
Yeah.
And
Hod Moore?
Yeah, Hod Moore and Janice. They had a son who would run away every once in a while and come down to our house. And then Janice would come and meet them. And then May, the grandmother, May Moore, she's the one who told us about climbing Mount Antone, and they didn't have a flag to put up, so she took off her bloomers and they put them on a stick so they could see it from the village. Yeah, she was a school teacher when she came here and married Jay Moore, Horace's mother.
And why did they want to? Because that was the highest point in Rupert?
Yeah, there was a platform up there. Dr. Giles had a road made to go to the top, and a platform up there, and you could see Lake George and the Hudson River from the top of the mountain. Yep. So people who climbed up there usually put up a flag of some sort. But she said they didn't do it. They didn't have one to put up.
Use the next best thing.
Yeah.
Bloomers.
Yes, and apparently they were up for quite a while, she said. So we went to school. My brother started school on Lewis Road, the little building that's down at the firehouse, the little one next to the cemetery. That was district number 5. And my brother went there to school. And I visited. I didn't go to school there, but I was allowed to come and see things. And during the Depression, of course, they gave, among other things, they gave food sometimes to the rural schools. So they used to put me out in the woodshed when I was a visitor in there, and I would count oranges and stuff like that. So I took part. My birthday came at the wrong time of the year, so I was almost 7 before I started school.
Okay.
And he started at age 5.
Wow.
So.
Wow. And it was the same situation. They would drive, someone would pick him up at the house and drive him down and bring him back.
Right. Yeah, and they went even up to Perkins Road, picked up the Kerjack kids and brought them. It was just a car. We all sat in the back seat, Yeah. And he brought us to the
And
Rupert School, to
because
this building.
how many? I mean, how many students were there at that time? I mean,
8 grades downstairs. hmm hmm
in one room.
Yep. Yeah, by one teacher who was a wonderful lady. She lived where Hollis Way is now. That the main house, which is down over the brook, that was the main house, and that got moved a few years ago. And she lived in the little house that's the house there now, up by the road. That was the tenant house, and her name was Dorothy Bramer. She was Dorothy Sheldon. Yeah, and she died of cancer when we were little kids. That was terrible.
Sh- Um,
Terrible for us.
because she was a younger woman too, probably.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She used to read to us just before we went home each day. She'd read us a chapter of the Green Mountain Boys. So we learned the history of Vermont. I loved that book. And she always made it exciting because there was a lot about Rupert in there. I don't even know if they publish it anymore. It was a popular novel. Anyway, all about you know, the border war that we had with the Yorkers. That's what Meeting House Hill is named for, because they had I can't remember, there was a nickname for the whip that they used. They never killed them, but they burned their houses and they whipped them and sent them back over the border. The minister called me the other day and he said, "Was there ever a Rupert in New York?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well," and he read me a passage from somewhere, and he said, "In Rupert, New York, such and such." And I said, "Well, for years there was a border war, and Albany claimed Rupert. So it was called Rupert, New York from their point of view. But I said it was never in New York. We used to burn their houses and send them back and then marry them in the next generation." But so that was, wasn't aware of that, of course, but it is part of our history.
Where is the hill?
Right? That house, that hill right over there, you can look at it. It's where the town barns are now.
It's the hill behind there.
Yeah. It was called Meeting House Hill because it looked down on the meeting house,
Okay.
on the church. Yeah.
Okay.
hmm I know that when I was growing up, it seemed, and maybe it was just my impression, that there were no new people in the village or who came to Rupert, not for a long time. But after the war in 1947, the first family that I thought were new were the Kerjacks. After Mr. Kerjack died, he was only in his 40s when he died of a heart attack. And so Gertrude stayed there and brought up the family. And yeah, and see, they rode in the little school bus that we all went in to come down here to school. And because we had a Bible teacher on Fridays, they didn't have to. We envied them because they didn't have to sit and listen because they were Catholic. Oh, and then the second family that came was the Stigowskis. Yeah, because as my mother always said, she always would joke with Gene when she'd meet him. She said, "You made me move in 1947." So she always rubbed it in a little bit. But actually, and my grandmother died approximately the same time. As a matter of fact, during her auction, somebody had the measles, and the whole town got the measles from that exposure
From the auction.
at the auction. Yep, where I live now. They were selling the cattle there at that time. So I used to know who it was who originally had the measles, but anyway, we all got them. So it cleaned us out.
Wow.
This book was our only printed history of the town. Written and published by George Hibbard, who was superintendent of schools in Rupert in 1899. I can't stand to kill anything. So I didn't hunt. I didn't fish because I didn't have any patience. My brother was a good fisherman, but I was showing Jeb at the post office the other day, the only fish I ever caught, I shot. I shot into the water and the concussion killed the fish, so he floated to the top. That was on the little brook where I live right now. Mostly reading, I guess. That was it. I read all the time. I don't know if there was I read anything I got, but I graduated from high school in 1955. Salem. I was valedictorian. And Sheldon Roberts, who lived where the Krauses do now, incidentally, he was one of the founders of Silicon Valley. He was one of the ones who broke out and formed that company as in rebellion and made millions. He was born there and brought up there, and he was the other Rupert boy who became valedictorian. He wrote me a letter congratulating me. So then I went to UVM and graduated. Well, first I wanted to be an actor. I switched to teaching. So I graduated from UVM in '59, okay? And my first job was down in the Catskills, Margaretville. I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade English down there. I still hear from some of my kids down there too. And then I came up to Vermont. My cousin, Wilma, who grew up in Paulet, and she taught in Woodstock for a couple of years, and then she got married and moved to St. Johnsbury. Then she died when she was 32. So I went there in '61 after she had left in '61, and I was there from '61 to '87. In 1884, when the Congregational Church decided they were going to build a parsonage for their resident ministers, the land was to the church by D.C. Beebe, I believe, who owned what is now, or what's later became, Dorothy Harwood's house. And there was a little building on that land. And attached to the back of his house, it was a cobbler shop run by Royal Watrous, who was father of a family of, I think there was something like 6 children. And it later on became just sort of a tenant house of Mr. Beebe. Dartmouth College had they celebrated, I thought it was their 300th anniversary, but it must have been their 250th or something. And they reread their charter, and their charter was, among other things, to teach Native Americans. So then they set up this program called ABC, gave the towns along the Connecticut River and its branches a choice of choosing inner city kids and Americans or Native Americans. So Woodstock chose Native Americans, and we got, for several years, we got 10 Native Americans, boys. They bought a house for them, which I just read in the Woodstock paper is now for sale. So they're going to sell. I didn't realize the school kept on owning it after the program ended, but it was very near the high school, and we had a total number of 10 each year, but some would graduate, so then another group would come in to make up the 10 again. So they were guaranteed after high school 4 years at Dartmouth, tuition free. Hopis, Navajos, and then I have especially one boy wrote a nice letter for my party. He was a Kiowa from Oklahoma. Yeah, Claude Tonema. But he was an alcoholic, and he became one, so he used to write to me quite a bit. And he said I helped him a great deal. I don't know how, but anyway, I did. Apparently just, communicating with him. So he changed his name because he tried to become a different person to conquer his addiction. And he became William Claude Tonema. So I noticed in the letter he wrote, he said he wanted to be me more than anything else.
It's quite a story.
Then one boy was a Hopi, and he was in a Disney movie, The Boy and the Eagle. But anyway, while he was in high school, a wealthy man in town who had influence and so forth, he rented the movie or got the movie, and they showed it as in the movie theater there in Woodstock. And but Stan said, and his mother told me later on when I went to visit out there in Second Mesa in the Hopi territory, that he never got anything from Disney for being in the film. So, not surprising. Now he's an elder in the tribe. Yeah, I took my folks out there once, and then I had visitors from Wales. Took Katie out there. She wanted to see a red Indian, so we took pictures of her, one with full garb on, and so forth. She got it. She was a little lady, about 5 feet tall. Katie Jones. She's Margaret's, my cousin Margaret's, second cousin, I guess. Yep. Her mother and Margaret's grandfather were brother and sister. Yep. She lives just below Carnarvon in North Wales. When I started going to Wales, I adopted them and they adopted me, even though I don't have any Welsh blood at all. I went to summer school over there and became very close friends with the family, my Aunt Elizabeth's cousins. Yeah, also went at one time. We visited the Hopi Reservation. We also visited, we came in contact with a couple of the Navajo students. And later on in life, I heard from, we had a man here from Rupert, Ray Fisher, and his daughter works for the government of Alaska, the state government. So one day she called me. She said, I've got somebody here who wants to talk to you. He was one of the ABC students. So, okay. Yeah, I later took some of my family and visitors from Wales out to the western part of the United States, and we went to the Hopi Reservation and also to the Navajo Reservation. And I've also heard from students, one from Oklahoma, and Ralph Anderson was the name of the other boy, from Alaska, who was an Aleut Indian, yep. And so we got all sorts of tribes, which was wonderful. One became a very successful artist, a painter. I can't remember his name either at the moment, but they did graduate. They went through the program. Several of them had bad experiences in school before they came to ABC program because they were forbidden to speak their native language. They had to speak in English. They were forced to go to California to school, even though there was one nearer their own reservation. It was not I don't know if they've changed a lot, but the United States was not overly kind to its native people, and it still isn't, I'm sure. Yeah. So, but I asked some of them when I saw them out there if they thought the program was successful, and they thought for themselves. This was two or three of them told me they didn't think it was successful because they were too well educated for the other members of their tribe, and they weren't well educated to fit into our society. They weren't accepted, let's say, even because they were Native Americans. So I don't know how they've found it later on in life, but this was a few years ago, so that I spoke with them. Louis de Rothschild, who was the head of the Rothschild banking family in Austria, and they were forced out of Austria, and they came because they also knew Dorothy Thompson, and they had a property in Barnard also. And he married late in life, Louis did, and his wife was a Habsburg member of the ruling family of Austria for many years. And her grandchildren, two of them, came to the high school in Woodstock. Maria, I don't remember the boy's name, but there was a granddaughter, Maria. But anyway, their grandmother, who was curious about us, among other things, but also a very charming lady, she invited the children's teachers to come and visit where they were living. So we got a tour of her forest area, her estate, which was a nice farm. And I remember being fascinated by the fact that she picked up everything. I mean, there was not a branch that fell on the ground that she didn't pick up and keep that forest clean. Yeah. So I learned something about how Germans took care of not really Germans, but Austrians. And see, all this time, my landlady, my original landlady before I bought a house in Woodstock, her son was head of Radio Free Europe in Munich. So that was a connection too. She went often to Bavaria, and eventually I went twice to Bavaria while Dick was, Dick, I'm terrible on names right now. So he would take us for tours of southern Germany, pretending that he did not speak German at all. He speeded, he had a very heavy foot on the accelerator, and we would get stopped for speeding, and he would pretend he didn't understand what the policeman was telling him. Of course, he was fluent in several languages. He was the son of my landlady. He was my predecessor as the history teacher in Woodstock High School, Dorothy Cook, and his name was Richard Cook. He's now dead, as is she. Aunt Kate, even her birthday was the same as mine, but she was 78 years older than me. So she was in her 100th year when she died. Okay. So Aunt Kate I'm not sure if she was born in Wales, but their family came over in the 1870s to work in the slate quarries in West Paulet. And they were the Perry family. There were several brothers and three sisters, Kate, Nell, and Mary. And Mary became the grandmother of my cousin Margaret and my Aunt Elizabeth, the mother of Aunt Elizabeth. And she married a Lewis, who was also a Welch quarry family that came over. And Isaac Lewis, who was Margaret's grandfather, he had a brother, several brothers as a matter of fact, and when I started going to Wales, I reconnected with the brother David, who was a friend of C.S. Lewis, by the way, and he was a minister, and we stayed with him, reconnected with the family. There were often the Welsh who lived in West Paulet were coming and going all the time. They would come over, work a few years, then go back and bring their family, or just not come back.
Because they made more money here.
Because they made more money here, yes. And they didn't have to join a union here. Over there, the quarries were owned, and the workers were owned by the quarry owners, who were upper crust. Well, they thought they were anyway. So there was much more tension. They had a strike that lasted 3 years over there, and some people actually starved to death because the owners of the quarry would not give in and would not pay them anything. And they also owned their housing, so it was very bitter. That some of those quarrymen came over here as a choir and gave concerts to raise money to help the helpless over there who were on strike. There are articles in the Granville Sentinel about when they came here. They came back in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, as an anniversary for their original choir, and they performed at Green Mountain College in Poultney. Yeah, I went to summer school over there one year. Yep, it was cheaper to go there, including the airfare, than it was to go to summer school in Burlington at UVM. So I took the job. Took the opportunity. That's how I got reacquainted with the family. I went traveled for many years with another history teacher in Woodstock, and then later, well, I became friends with another teacher who, and she got a grant from Wellesley College, which was her college, and we had a project of reconnecting Welsh families who were over here with their families still in Wales. And we had I still have them, but they have to be updated, 2 slide programs of the reconnection. Yeah, it was fun. So that went on for several years, and that was why we kept going back. So Mary went over there. Her name was Mary Martin, but she went over there and stayed for a year with one of Uncle David's nieces, with Katie, the lady who came over here and went to the Grand Canyon with me. Yeah, Katie came over several times, yeah. But she was a fireball, let's say. Nice lady. She was from a large family, but unless you were the oldest one in the family, usually was the one who was able to get the education. So she went out to work. She was hired out as a domestic when she was quite young. She said she liked that because otherwise, if she had stayed home, she would have to take care of the newer kids that kept coming in the family. So she was glad. So she knew people all over the place, including Lord Snowdon, who married Princess Margaret. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he came to her funeral. Katie, very close to the family. Yeah, she was their cook for years. No, I was on my way over there when she died, Katie, but they had already had the funeral when I got there. But they said, they meaning her son and daughter-in-law, said one of her last speeches, or one of the last things she said was, "Is Jean here yet?"
Members of the extended family.
Generally, yeah. And then we also became very friendly with a member of the council of Carnarvon. Carnarvon is a sort of the royal capital of Wales. Not the real capital, but generally because the castle there, which was built, of course, in the 1200s, and that's where the first Prince of Wales was born. One time when Mary was over there, Mary Martin, it was during the coronation of Charles as Prince of Wales. Yep. She attended that. And Bobby and Margaret Haynes, Bobby was the one who worked for the local council. He became Lord Mayor of Carnarvon. At one point, it was just because it went to all the members of that council. They took turns being for a 2-year sprint, I think. So Bobby became, I've stayed with them too, so they live right inside the walled town of the castle.
What at least once.
Yeah, yeah. I took my folks there, and Katie went with us too one time. We usually ended up in Dublin, Germany 3 times probably, France. I've never gone to Italy. I'd love to, or Greece. I'd like to go there too, but I think my traveling days are over. Yep.
You owned a home in Woodstock.
I bought a home.
26 or 7 years then.
Yeah, and it would now be called not an Airbnb, but I rented rooms. It was a guest house. Yep. Now it's a B&B, but yes, he did. And Mary Rockefeller and I were both on the Calvin Coolidge Memorial Site committee together. So, yeah. So I did serve with her at one point. I used to brag when I worked at the Woodstock, at the bank in Woodstock, that if Mary Rockefeller and I both withdrew our money, the bank would close. She was a Billings, for which her uncle built the Billings, Montana's named for him, and the Great Northern Railroad was his railroad. That's how he got his millions. And that big house, which is now a national park in Woodstock, was the home where they lived. Mary. Yeah, retired from teaching. And then, and also my family, my brother died, my father died, and my mother became ill with a bone disease. So I gave up teaching and I spent my time, I drove back and forth weekends. And in the end, 1987, I sold my house over there and came home to take care of her. Yep, I continued. I worked at the bank in Woodstock for a few years, and I worked at Gillingham's and got to wait on Alexander Solzhenitsyn when he was in exile in Vermont. Yeah, he came and bought some wine from me one day when I worked in the store there. Apparently this is the oldest burial ground in Rupert because the first settlers came here on this side of the mountain. The story is that Mr. Eastman didn't like the color of the stones in the brook near Dorset. They were white, and he wanted to come further north or come further so that he got brown stones, which would mean that the soil was good enough to grow crops. So that's why he ended up here in Rupert, and he built the little house down, which used to be in Roger Leach's farm, and that's the oldest building, as far as I know, here in the town, still standing. The Eastman family, and I don't remember the name of the first settler, but is supposedly, in gossip at least, related descendants, no, early settlers, members of the family, which later on became Eastman Kodak.